All right, everybody, it's the second hour of the Elias Makos Show, and to kick off this hour of the show, we are joined by the leader of the Conservative Party of Quebec, Eric Duhaime, and he's joined us in studio. Thanks so much for making your way down here.
Always a pleasure.
So we're going to start off by talking about the SAQ,
yes.
right? The province's liquor board. There are some members of the SAQ. They're going to propose this in a week or so at the SAQ meeting, where they're going to say, hey, let's end the SAQ's monopoly on a lot of the alcohol that's sold in this province. Obviously, you can get beer and certain wine at the grocery store and the dépanneur, but everything else controlled by the SAQ. So this is a party, the SAQ, that in the past, 2012, 2014, they've talked about it. They get to power. They abandon the idea. They say, listen, we make too much money out of this. I want, Conservative Party of Quebec. I know you got the most libertarian streak out of all the parties here. So what are your thoughts on the province and booze sales?
Well, first off, I wrote a book a few years ago called La SAQ pousse le bouchon, like the SAQ's pushing too far, but pushing the cork, but it doesn't make any sense in English. Yeah. But I've always been a partisan of competition, not necessarily privatization. And there's a difference between ending a public monopoly and privatizing. You can still have the SAQ, but at least if you bring other players, and a guy who arrives from Chile, you say, okay, look, you can open up a store and make us discover the wines from your region and make us test it and taste it on the spot. If you're a producer, well, you can sell your products at the pastry, the liqueur that goes well with the pastries that they sell out there, and so on and so forth. Like we see everywhere in Europe. We love traveling to Europe, to the regions of Europe, to discover all those flavors, because we have that. Here in Quebec, we have over 300 producers locally. Unfortunately, they're not very well sold at the SAQ, and they can't sell with the restaurant at the corner or the convenience store or the bakery. So what we're saying is that it's time to do that. All the other parties did it. You have to remember, in the 80s, the Parti Québécois started to privatize 129 stores of the SAQ. They lost the election on December 85, and that's why it didn't happen. The Liberals came back with the idea. Carlos Leitao, when he was minister responsible of the SAQ, talked about bringing competition. And as you rightly pointed out, the CAQ, for 2 elections, they campaigned saying they will end the public monopoly. It would benefit the consumers and the producers in Quebec, and that's why we're in favor of it.
So one of the things where I'm skittish on it is because, you look at the bad examples, right? So when I've traveled, you used to talk about traveling to Europe. Well, let me talk to you about traveling to the United States, where you go and it's like every strip mall and every corner, there's a shady store that is geared towards getting people who may have a problem with drinking more. And it's just like I don't want to end up in a situation like that. I felt the same way in Alberta, by the way, at times, because they have a privatized system. And I've been to shops in Alberta. I'm like, this is like dingy, and I don't feel good in these types of places. So in your mind, you're not talking about that. You're just talking like, what does it look like in a scenario where you get to say, what do booze sales look like?
Well, it looks like the fact that the SAQ stores are still there. But they don't have the monopoly. So it means that, as I said, in all sorts of regions, all the producers can associate themselves with all the stores and sell their products at the market, wherever it is. There is a link between all sorts of local flavors. There's a discovery from other people. We call it caviste. I don't know can you say caviste in English as well?
I'm not so sure.
Anyway, it's the people who, open up their own stores.
Yeah.
It's a relic of the prohibitionist era. That's the thing we have to understand. That's the reason why it's so regulated. And, people are saying...
But are you also talking about a type of regulation, just so there's some body, and maybe it's the SAQ, that determines, okay, you know what? Your goal to introduce people to wine from a certain part of the world, that's okay. Oh, but you want to open up a corner shop to sell 40s? No, you can't do that. Would there be some sort of process there?
Yes, but yes and no, because you cannot deprive, for example, convenience store. They already sell booze. Actually, they already sell
but
wine,
beer and wine, and that's different. That's what it's different.
It's different, but it used to be. It used to be forbidden. It's it happened in the 80s that they started selling wine. So we're moving forward, and what I'm disappointed of, I came out this week to support the grassroots members of the CAQ that are proposing that at their convention next week. What I'm disappointed of is the finance minister, Éric Girard, that came out yesterday saying that he's closing the door. He's not letting the people in his own party vote on something that the party promised in the past. And that's very weird. Wow. And the reason he said is because there's too much money. As finance minister, he loves the $1.5 billion that he gets out of it all the time. Mm-hmm. But what we answer back to that is, look, we have other products that are overtaxed, and we're thinking of tobacco or gas, and it doesn't mean that we need a public monopoly to sell gas and sell tobacco, and it doesn't mean that people are buying cigarettes in weird places and it's creepy. So the idea is like, let the competition and do its work.
I'll just say, and we'll leave it at this on this one, because one of the things that intrigues me the most, or where I think like Quebec, maybe we found a pretty decent mix with the beer and wine, certain wines being sold to dépanneurs, for instance, but hard liquor and other things only at the SAQ. I look at Quebec. We have, for drunk driving, it's 0.08. That's like the highest level in the country. Yet here in Quebec, we have one of the lowest levels. It's Quebec and Ontario with the lowest levels of drunk driving. And it sort of seems like with the SAQ and with how we handle beer and wine, we've created a society that is just very adult and smart about how we consume alcohol. And I'm worried if you open it up, we end up in a place where people are less, that use alcohol, they consume alcohol in ways that aren't as smart as we do right now in this province. Seems like we're so smart about using alcohol.
As conservatives, we do believe that, when you give more freedom of choice to individuals, they behave properly. Mm-hmm. And the more you try to put them into a cage, the worse it gets, and then you have more problems. We do believe, we should attack people who have problems and help people out who have a problem with alcohol. But, do you think that people on a Saturday night at 9 p.m. are not looking to buy booze or less than on a Monday at 9:30 in the morning? So, our system currently is not done for consumers. It's done to please unionized workers at the SAQ. You have to remember that also.
So that's another great debate about how, working retail at the SAQ seems to be a brilliant career option. And that's, retail doesn't generally go hand to hand with that.
No. And how many managers are there in the SAQ branch? You have to understand that as well. Yeah. If they had competition, they would have to, perform a little better.
We do have an industrial complex and that kind of stuff, and I'll give you that. So, you know what? Let me just get to something you said, because you mentioned the SAQ members that want this, and they're getting shut down by their own party. Seems to me, and this thing maybe has to do with some of the polls we've seen this week in Quebec, where I think you're doing quite well in Quebec City in that. You're trying to peel away voters from other parties, right? So what is your strategy for peeling away voters from other parties in a way that doesn't, because sometimes I feel when you try and peel away voters from other parties, you do it on sort of extremist tangents, like trying to go as far to the right or left as possible to peel away voters.
So I don't go on the left that often, actually.
But you know how extremism works. Sometimes the right and the left, they end up in the same spot when you get too extreme, right? So what is your strategy here for peeling off those SAQ voters, moderates, hopefully?
What we're seeing right now, you're right. The SAQ is losing their voters. They're at the lowest since they've been in power for the last 6 years. The poll we had this week is the lowest they had in 6 years. And the reason is not necessarily left or right. It's a matter of trust. If the CAQ is going down, it's because people know that they lied. We know that they did lie. We know they lied. They know we know they lied, and they're still lying. And they're still refusing to apologize and recognize they lied. And this is the huge problem. And of course, I'm talking about the third bridge in Quebec City. The third link, sorry. It's not necessarily a bridge.
You wanted a bridge.
I want a bridge. They want a tunnel. But the idea is that people, even those who are in favor or against it, who voted CAQ or not, they realize that their premier was lying, and that's very weird, because it was such a fundamental issue. I know that here in Montreal it doesn't affect you guys at all, but in Quebec City it was the ballot question.
Well, broken promises do affect everybody, I think. And I guess one thing I want to ask you: look at those polls. You see a lot of people who have gone towards not your party, but the PQ. You see a resurgent Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon in the Parti Québécois, right? So when you see that you have an issue here where you've got a winner. The SAQ probably sort of pulled the wool over the eyes of a lot of voters on this, and you see them going towards the PQ. Is it another indication, as I keep trying to tell you, to maybe avoid the extremes? And if you're more moderate, you can be more successful at peeling off voters?
Are you telling me that Quebec separation is moderate?
Well,
because that's what Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon is talking about all the time.
Point taken, but in the realm of Quebec politics, separatism is moderate because you can have there are a lot of moderates politically, financially who are sovereignist.
I find it extremely relevant in the current context personally, and for that perspective, I think it's extremist. But Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon came out and started to go up in the polls because he spoke about the king. The big thing is about monarchy. No, but it's true. Yeah. That was the window that brought him up. Yeah. And I think those debates are very symbolic. They're very emotional, but I think in the long run, it doesn't stand. I mean, what we want to talk about is our healthcare system to have better services for our patients, for taxpayers to pay less taxes and better services. We see our roads, we see a lot of things in Quebec are going down the drain in terms of public services, and we're always paying more and more taxes. And this is what I'm concerned about, and this is what the Conservatives are offering. We're not into symbolic things about are we going to pledge allegiance to the king or not? Are we going to watch tomorrow the show or not?
Eric, radio, right? We're up against the clock, and I know you know that stuff.
Unfortunately, I hate that part.
Of course.
It's better than TV, though. We have more time than TV.
Very true. But let's wrap on this, and I do have to ask you to be brief because you know how radio works. Just on building your base, will you make more initiatives to go towards the center, or are you going to continue to go down a path that I feel where you go more towards the extremes to grow your base?
It's normal that during leadership campaigns you talk to your base. Obviously, the closer you get to the election, the more you talk to all the voters. General speaking, the other thing I'll have to do also, and it concerns you guys here in Montreal and the non-francophone voters, is that we see the Liberals sinking. In French Quebec, they disappeared. They're at 3-4%. In my constituency, they're at 2% right now. There's no Liberals left except among non-francophones, and I think it's time for non-francophones to open up their mind and see that the Liberal Party is not an alternative anymore. It's a parking, and if they want to be part of the huge debate and the big debate between more or less state in their life, well, they need to move on.
All right, we've asked Eric Duhaime, leader of the Conservative Party of Quebec, to stick around a little bit longer because we're having a good time discussing this morning. So, Eric, I know a little while back, just when the Third Link stuff started, and by the way, you pointed this out, it's now day 18, and the Quebec City media still talking about this Third Link. You sent out a letter to SAQ MNAs in the area saying, hey, forget about peeling off voters. You're also trying to peel off MNAs. Yeah. So what about that? Did you get any bites?
I spoke to several members of the National Assembly from the Quebec City region. For now, no, they're not necessarily interested. They didn't close the door. Even publicly, some of them said that for the moment they were not moving. In 2 weeks, it's going to be the week off, and they're going back in their constituencies. Right now, they're in the bubble of the National Assembly, but as soon as they're going to get on the ground and talk to the people, they're going to realize that people in Quebec City are furious. And I think if there's going to be a move, if there's a move that's going to happen, that's when it's going to happen.
What do you think you offer? So let's take the scenario of a SAQ MNA, not in cabinet, a backbencher. What do you think your party offers them?
Well, first off, in the current context, it provides them an opportunity to stand up for what their voters voted for. Instead of following their leader, they can follow their constituency. And that, I think, is really important. The second thing is that overnight they'll become very well known in terms of media. They'll be more known than ever. They're going to have more press coverage in 24 hours than the rest of the caucus had in a year. So that's something that we can bring them light. They could bring their own issues and fight for them. And you're always, when you're part of a team, and it's normal in a political party, you can't agree with everything, but there's things that they disagree with. Probably they couldn't voice. Now they will be able to voice it. And they're going to have direct access to the leader of the party that they never did with François Legault, obviously. So I think there's a lot of opportunities and also, if they're from the Quebec City region, the probabilities of getting reelected are probably better at this point of time if they were conservative than CAQ. Because yesterday, again, there's 8 constituencies in Quebec City where we're either leading or within less than 5% of the CAQ. So there is some movement there, and so they're in the free fall right now. The CAQ, they lost 14% in the last month.
So here's the thing, so you make a great case of all the benefits if they were to leave their party, come to you with some benefits. Yet you haven't had, there's nobody who's taken you up on the offer. There's clearly hesitancy on that. So I want to talk about that hesitancy, because if let's say I've been in the SAQ and I'm trying to think about reasons why I wouldn't want to jump on board Team Eric Duhaime, it's because of what I've seen in the past from your party on your base, and how sometimes to grow your base, you go down some more extreme paths. Now, just in the last little while, thankfully, it didn't last long in this province. And I'm so happy that the debate didn't last long. But we had this brief window where for a week we were talking about, and I know you had an autocorrect error on the iPhone, les dragons queens, the drag queens, right? So it was, thankfully it didn't last long, because I think like 80% of people, 90% of people are all on the same page. We have no problem with drag queens. We may have an issue when they start showing up at children-themed events. Let's just leave it at that, right? And sometimes some of the messaging that came from your party to try and get people onto your base went from that sort of like middle of the road, like, hey, listen, we have no problem with drag queens. We may have an issue if they show up at children-themed events. And then it went towards, I'm not saying it got all the way there, but it went towards the bigotry file, where you're like, where some of them, not from you, but some of the people in, that vote for your party went down the bigotry path and went down the hateful path. And that to me is such a turnoff. So if I'm a CAQ MNA, I'd have to join a party where there's some of that attachment.
Well, when they come, they're going to show a moderate face, obviously. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that you're right. On the drag queen issue, I came out against the public funding when there's children involved in schools or kindergartens. And I wanted also to make sure that if it happens, the parents have their word to say. So you need the approval of the parents. Those were the two things. I enjoy drag queen shows, actually. I go here not that far away in the gay village. I've seen shows for ages, and I love them. But for kids, I have some concern. The fact that they're paid $500 for 45 minutes, we don't pay our principals in our schools that salary. Mm-hmm. I have a problem as taxpayer. And I think the parents that discovered that their kids were exposed to drag queens at 5-6 years old and they didn't know, who have a concern, I'm also with them on that issue.
So, but do you ever have to say to your party, and you say what you just said right here on air, and you say, that is our line. If you take it to a point where it becomes towards a hatred of people that are different, and I know you go from drag queens, then people make the link to trans, rightfully or wrong on that one. And then it turns into the bigotry file. Do you tell your party, do you tell your people, hey, be careful?
Absolutely. And not only be careful, but if you remember, the debate started here in Quebec because the National Assembly adopted a Quebec Solidaire motion unanimously, saying that, and the first part I was totally in agreement with, and I said it publicly, saying that we shouldn't insult and we shouldn't, have discriminatory comments and everything about drag queens. And I agree with that. Where I disagreed is when they started saying that we need to, and those are the three words that are important that I didn't like, expose our kids to drag queens to show that Quebec is a model worldwide in terms of inclusiveness. It's not the role of the state to do that, and it's not the role of taxpayers to fund that. And that's where I disagreed, and I think I was very clear. I even came out when I did my announcement. I did it with a transgender who's the most well-known in French Quebec, Michel Blanc, who's also like me against the fact that they're funded by the state and they're exposed to kids without the willingness of the parents, to make sure that we were showing that we're not against trans, I'm obviously not against gays, and to show that it has nothing to do with gender, it's not a gender being a drag queen, and that those drag queens that are going to school, they're not just a costume, they're also bringing gender theories, because that's the stories that they're reading to their kids, and that parents should be aware of.
We have to leave it there, Mr. Dam. Eric, thanks for coming in.
Always a pleasure.
A lot of time before an election, and I guess, we'll on another edition, we'll talk about maybe some outreach to Anglophones, because I guess there's still opportunities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming in. That's Eric Duhaime. He's the leader of the Conservative Party of Quebec.